There we go. Okay, so if anybody has a question, just raise your, just send it in the chat, or raise your hand and unmute yourself as we go on. So the portion today is Korach. That's this week's portion. And in the Eitz Chaim, it begins on page 860. Look in your table of contents of your Chumash for within the book of Numbers for Korach, or it's chapter 16 of the book of Numbers, 16 through 18. And this portion continues thematically what we did what we read about last week with the portion Shlach Lecha, in terms of the people complaining to Moses. What are you doing, Moses? Leading us potentially to a land that is unsafe for us. It'll be impossible to defeat the enemy. Who are you to lead us into this territory? And in last week's portion, we found that that God wants to get rid of the entire nation of Israel and start over with Moses, and Moses prays on the people's behalf, and God relents, and then we learn some other laws that try to reiterate the covenant between the people and God, and how by following these laws, especially the last paragraph of last week's portion about the commandment to wear tzitzit, that we can be reminded all the time that God is with us, that we affirm our commitment to the covenant, and we have faith in God. But that faith is short-lived, because this week's portion begins, now Korach, son of Yitzhar, son of Kohat, son of Levi, betook himself along with Datan and Aviram, sons of Eliav, and On, son of Pelet, descendants of Reuben, to rise up against Moses, together with 250 Israelites, chieftains of the community, chosen in the assembly, men of repute. They combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far, for all the community are holy, all of them, and the Lord is in their midst. Why then do you raise yourselves above the Lord's congregation?" Okay, so now every time I read this portion, and I'm reminded of Datan, which I guess in English would be pronounced Dathan, I think of Edward G. Robinson and the Ten Commandments movie, right? So the perfect, no good character from the late 50s in American movies was Edward G. Robinson, who I think was Jewish too, played this role in that classic movie, and you want to picture a guy with a cigar in his mouth coming up to Moses and says, now I can't do it. I picture like Rich Little or some of those other impersonators doing Edward G. Robinson. And, so that's kind of who I imagine when I read this portion. This just nasty figure who is just morally corrupt. So Korach and Datan and Aviram and On. So Korach's a Levi, Datan, Aviram, and On are Reubenites. So before we look at the commentary below, there's enough material here. Let me just let in somebody else. There's enough material here for us to ask questions about this. Like, who are these people? So what is the significance of a Levite and Reubenites to be rebelling against Moses and Aaron? What are some ideas before you look at the commentary? What's the significance of three people from the tribe? No, one person from the tribe of Levi and three people from the tribe of Reuben. What is the significance of their tribal affiliation for their rebellion? Anybody have an idea? So
wasn't Reuben the oldest
okay, very
son?
good. That's right. So that's a good point, Saul. So Reuben, in the order, in the birth order for yes. So Carl, I just want to share this. Carl shared with me privately that Edward G. Robinson's born name was Emmanuel Goldberg. So yes, he was Jewish. So back in Genesis, we're told that when Jacob's children are being born, and Leah is the one to give birth to four children, four boys right in a row. Reuben is the firstborn. So there is a sense in the Torah and in the Bible that firstborns should have some legitimacy. Firstborns should have some power over others. Firstborns have some authority when it comes to who's going to be in charge, who do you look to for leadership in the community. And Reuben is really, the tribe of Reuben itself is kind of cast aside. It's really the tribe of Judah that is ascendant, and Judah is the fourth born, not the firstborn. And later in the book of Numbers, we're going to see that it's the tribe of Reuben and Gad and half the tribe of Manasseh who come to Moses and say, hey, we're on the other side of the Jordan. This land here is fertile. Can we stay? We don't even want to go into the land of Israel, but we promise that we'll help out with the battles and stuff like that. So Reuben already, we'll see in a couple of weeks that they're kind of distancing themselves from the rest of the people. And we know in later Jewish history that the tribe of Reuben will be among the first that will be attacked by the Assyrians during the Israelite kingdom years, and they'll be lost to history. They'll be among the first tribes lost to history. So Reuben, we know, is already on the outskirts, and that Judah is on the ascendancy. So it's possible that Reuben here, or these three, Datan, Aviram, and On, are sensing that maybe they're on the outs and they want to get back in, and they feel badly about that. Now Korach, being a Levite, is part of the Kohathite clan, and the Kohathites, among the four families that we learned at the beginning of the book of Numbers, that have particular responsibilities in the Mishkan and later in the temple in Jerusalem. So all the Levites have a responsibility for the worship service, but it's Moses and Aaron, who are Levites also, so that Korach is their cousin, perhaps is feeling left out. Like, who are Moses and Aaron, my cousins, Korach is saying, to have this position of leadership in the community, both Moses as the political leader and Aaron as the religious leader. What about me? Korach is saying. Who are you? What about me? Okay, so we have already, just from their names and who they are, a sense of possibly why they are rebelling. Okay, and there's also one other idea that we're going to see in the commentary below about that back in verse 3, they combined against Moses, and those who came in a couple minutes late after we started, with the portion is Korach. It's Numbers chapter 16 through 18. that we're going to look at today. And so in verse 3 of chapter 16, they combined against Moses and Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far, for all the community are holy." So that's in Hebrew, it says, Kol ha'edah kulam kedoshim. All of the congregation, all of the community is holy. So there might not be necessarily something to think about that phrase, because we're told in the book of Exodus or in the book of Leviticus, we're told all the time, Kedoshim atem ki kadosh ani Adonai Elohechem, that you are holy, for I, the Lord your God, is holy. So they're not saying necessarily anything unusual here. We're all holy, so who are you to lead us? We're just as qualified to lead. So let's take a look at the commentary below the line to see what some of the other issues are here about this so-called rebellion. The theme of Israel's unhappiness and rebelliousness continues in this parsha. Several highly placed Israelites, resenting the prominence of Moses and Aaron, claim the right to leadership for themselves. Korach, a Levite, asserts himself as the equal of Moses and Aaron. It's not entirely clear which of them he wishes to replace, right? Does he want to be the political leader? Does he want to be the religious leader? But nonetheless, he's their cousin. Leaders of the tribe of Reuben claim leadership in the name of the descendants of Jacob's firstborn son, just as Saul pointed out. It may be that a series of discouraging events, including the deaths at Taverah, back in chapter 11, and at Kivrot HaTa'ava, also in chapter 11. This is after, they complain about the lack of food, and so they, etc. And the disastrous episode of the scouts from last week's portion have demoralized the people to the point at which they are vulnerable to this uprising, right? So people are dying as they are in the desert, rebelling against God. They are fearful, they are demoralized, like there's no hope. And they've just been told they're going to be wandering in the desert for 38 more years, and that this generation is going to die out in the desert. So that would be pretty demoralizing. So as a last-ditch effort, saying, we don't like this idea that we're going to be wandering so much time, but that we're going to be dying in the desert. Who are you, Moses and Aaron, to do this? We want our turn. See if we can take over. The uprising is put down only after two miraculous events. So we'll see that coming up. One miracle destroys the rebels and affirms the primacy of Moses and Aaron, and a second miracle authenticates the primacy of the Levites for the divine service. So Korach, Datan, Aviram, and On have 250 followers in the camp. 250 followers is not such a big, so Saul is asking a question, do they know that they're going to die before entering the land? Yes. I mean, we're told in last week's portion that that's the punishment, and we just assume that the whole community of Israel knows that too. So yes, all the people know that what's in store for them. So the two miracles that have, so these four have 250 followers. So if you think about the population at the time, there are about 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 50. So that means there's over 1 million people, and there are only 250 out of that million. So 100,000 would be 10%, 1,000 would be 1%, 100 would be 1/10 of 1%. So this is 2/10 of 1% of the population rebelling. That's not much of a rebellion, but these are prominent people, these four. So perhaps, that there are other people who might be influenced by them. So those 250, these four and their 250 followers, the one miracle that happens is that the earth opens up and swallows only them and not the rest of the Israelite community. So that's one miracle that happens. They get swallowed by the earth to disappear forever. And the other miracle that happens is that each of the tribes are supposed to bring a stick or a branch into the tent of meeting, including the tribe of Levi. And Aaron represents the tribe of Levi and brings his branch in. It's just a branch that has been shaved of any flowers or twigs or anything like that. Just a staff. They all bring it, and overnight they all mark, whose stick is whose, and it's clear that in the morning, the next morning, that the stick that belongs to Aaron is the one that blossoms. So that's the miracle to show that Aaron is reaffirmed as the religious leaders of the people, that it's Aaron that is chosen to do that and not the others as well. So those are the two miracles that happen in this portion to reaffirm Aaron as the religious leader of the people and Moses as the political leader of the people. So now the commentary goes on. In Jewish lore, Korach is the arch demagogue, lusting for power to inflate his own prominence, not to serve the people. Right? So when you're an evil person in the Torah, and it's clear that you're punished in the Torah, then the Midrash, the rabbinic commentary, is going to exaggerate your evil qualities and come up with stories that highlight how from birth you were evil and all the other evil things that the Torah didn't include to add to the evil character himself. So in other words, Cecil B. DeMille, it's clear if you look at the credits to the Ten Commandments movie, that there were rabbis who served as people that provided some help for the movie. And so just some of the things that Pharaoh's daughter is named as Bithia in that movie, if you remember, and the Ten Commandments trivia people out there will know who the actress is that played Bithia in that movie. That doesn't matter. What matters is that Pharaoh's daughter goes unnamed in the Torah. We're just told Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses in the basket in the Nile and adopts and brings Moses into the house. There's no name. We know from the Midrash that her name is Bithia, or in Hebrew, Batya. It's a nice Hebrew name. Batya means daughter of God. Okay, so now that's a fascinating name that the rabbis come up with for the daughter of Pharaoh, because she is the daughter of God, right? Because in Egypt, Pharaoh is God. But they give her the name, the daughter of Yah, which is the Hebrew God. So by adopting Moses, in other words, she somehow instinctively knew and subconsciously knew that she was doing something that was fateful, that it wasn't just something in the moment, there was something that was beyond this moment, that she now is a pawn in the greater script that God is playing out. So the rabbis, by naming people that go unnamed, also add elements to the story. So the fact that Cecil B. DeMille casted Edward G. Robinson in the role of Dathan, because these four are rebelling against Moses and Aaron, but have they always been bad people? We don't know. This is the first time that we hear of them in the Torah. So is it fair to say that they've always been bad? It's like the stories about Esau back in the book of Genesis. Esau is not necessarily a bad guy. Just because he likes to hunt, just because he comes back home one day famished and is willing to sell the birthright in order to eat that lentil stew, does that make him a bad person? The rabbis make him into a bad person because of later history and ascribe the Roman Empire is descended from Esau. So the archenemy of Israel at the time of the rabbis, the Romans, are descended from Esau. So this is what the rabbis do in helping the reader understand from their perspective who these characters are. And so if Datan, Aviram, On, and Korach are bad people here, then it must be that they're always bad. So that's another part of the backstory here. So it's interesting now to see below the line what the Midrash does with Korach. So in Jewish lore, Korach is the arch demagogue, lusting for power to inflate in his own prominence, not to serve the people. So he's an egomaniac. Thus, the Mishnah describes illegitimate controversy for personal gain, not for the sake of heaven, as being like the dispute of Korach and his followers. So there's controversy for the sake of heaven, and there's controversy not for the sake of heaven. So Hillel and Shammai, two great rabbis from the rabbinic period, from the first century, the beginning of the first century, that their disputes were for the sake of heaven, because they, even though they disagreed with each other when it came to Jewish law, they still respected each other, and they still allowed the students in their academies to interact with one another and to marry one another as well. So that dispute was for the sake of heaven, but Korach's dispute with Moses was not for the sake of heaven, because it was all about arrogance and demagoguery. Okay, so that's one thing. And now it goes on. One interpreter understands this as the dispute of Korach with his followers, so that they were united only because each faction in the rebellion had its own agenda. So the rabbis are saying that each four weren't even united themselves in their message. They each were rebelling about something different. They each had their own agenda. They were united only in their opposition to Moses and Aaron. Like many demagogues, they defined themselves by what they were against, not by a vision of what they stood for, right? So that if you think about demagogues over the centuries, they inflicted great harm on their country or their empire and their enemies, but they were ultimately defeated because their vision was about what they were against, not what they were for. That's an element of it. And you think, to oversimplify Hitler, what he was against was the people who put Germany down, and especially the Jews that took away from Germany's rightful place in the world. So by having that negative vision, this commentator, this Kalischer, is suggesting that ultimately fails, that it's only a positive message that would have any chance for any leader to be successful. And then the Midrash goes on, and the commentary goes on here about something that it connects with the previous portion. One tradition, Numbers Rabbah, so that's one collection of Midrash on the book of Numbers, pictures Korach complaining about the tithes and offerings Moses demanded of the people, saying, "You lay a heavier burden on us than the Egyptians did." Right? So we learn about some of these tithes in the previous chapter, chapter 17. So we think this is a chapter 15. We think that each portion is an independent unit. The rabbis make it clear that it's not. It's one story following the other, and everything is interconnected. And you can't just start this portion independent of last week's portion, because because it follows right on the foot of it. And if it talks about tithes, maybe that's what Korach is arguing against, right? We didn't have to pay taxes back in Egypt. Why do you instituting taxes on us? And Korach in this midrash never mentions that these taxes were designed to help the poor, to maintain the sanctuary, and to give the Israelites ways of expressing their gratitude to God and their dependence on God. So, in other words, he's playing the message to the people, hey, Moses is instituting taxes, not, these taxes are for a good reason to help support the poor and to actually help us, the Levites. No, he just sees it as taxes, and that's a way to, I don't have to say too much to understand, to help us understand that it's all about what's the news and what's fake news, right? How you, what's the message you're getting across, and how you're playing with the information in a particular way to rile up the masses, right? So that continued. So the Midrash is suggesting that Korach is like a certain political leader that we're familiar with today. And another Midrash from that same collection of Numbers Rabbah portrays Korach as caricaturing the rituals of the Torah by casting them in extreme form. And this is really with what came right before. Does a library full of Torah scrolls require a mezuzah with a few biblical verses in it on the doorpost? And the next one, does a completely blue talit need the required blue thread added to its tzitzit, right? Thus, Korach was challenging not only Moses and Aaron's authority, but that of the Torah and ultimately of God. So, in other words, Korach is pictured in this midrash as not accepting the commandments, but asking questions about it to make it seem as if the commandments themselves were ridiculous. So the commandment immediately prior to this portion, Korach, was a commandment to wear tzitzit, these fringes on the corners of the garment that would have a blue thread in them. So Korach is asking, what if you have an all blue talit? You might not be able to see the blue thread then. Do you still have to have a blue thread? And they would add to this, what do you need a mezuzah on all the doors of the rooms of your house? But what if the room of your house has all these Torah scrolls in it? Why would you need a mezuzah on the doorpost of the house then that only has a little phrase, a few phrases from the Torah, when you have a whole room inside? What do you need a mezuzah for? So these questions, though they might seem innocent, or they might be referred to as klutz kashyas, right? If anybody who's ever taught a group of middle school kids, there's always one or two middle school kids who would like to rile up the teacher, especially a substitute teacher, by asking questions like this to see if they can test the temper and the patience of the teacher, right? So that's how Korach is pictured in this particular midrash. Okay, Moses, you just taught us about tzitzit, just taught us about mezuzah. So what about this, Moses? And see if Moses's temper can be, if he can make Moses angry. So all of these ideas are here to help us understand who this Korach person is, who we've never met before, where he came from, what his background is. And it's just, the rabbis aren't right. in their portrayal of Korach. It's just that they wrote this 1,500 years ago, so it's been part and parcel of Jewish tradition. But we could just as well come up with some psychological insight too, in trying to understand what is Korach's motivation here, because it seems to come out of the blue. So the rabbis are trying to make it not come out of the blue and provide some context for us. So there are a couple of other comments here that I want to highlight also, because number one, we're told about Korach's genealogy, right? Now Korach, son of Yitzhar, son of Kohat, son of Levi. So we're told usually a person is known by his father's name. We're told in last week's portion who the 12 scouts were. So like Caleb was the son of Yefuneh. Joshua was the son of Nun. All of them were introduced to them as so-and-so, son of so-and-so. So why do we know about Korach's father? Well, that's standard. But why do we know of his grandfather and his great-grandfather? And if we already know, if the Torah is telling us about who his grandfather and great-grandfather is, why doesn't it go further back to Jacob or to Isaac or to Abraham? Why does it stop at Levi? So that's what the next comment is. Why does Korach's genealogy stop there and not trace itself back to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? And the answer is also from Numbers Rabbah, because Jacob on his deathbed prayed, "If any of my descendants turns out wicked, may my name not be associated with them. Such a person is not worthy of being called an Israelite." Now, Jacob didn't say that on his deathbed, but the rabbis are suggesting that Jacob said that on his deathbed as to why, if you're already going further than just father in introducing us, then there has to be a reason why it stopped at a particular point. And this makes a nice comment about how Jacob doesn't want to have anything to do with Korach, and that God listened to him and therefore did not stopped the genealogy at great-grandfather. Okay, that's an interesting point. And one other point about these people is the four of them. The fourth one is On, son of Pelet, and the rest of the portion we're told about Korach, Datan, and Aviram, and On isn't mentioned again. So that raises a question: why isn't On mentioned again? Why is it only Korach, Datan, and Aviram as we keep on reading the portion? So here's an interesting comment. He is never mentioned again in the story. An ancient tradition relates that his wife talked him out of following Korach, by having the wife say, "What good will it do us if Korach wins? We will be subservient to him as we now are to Moses and Aaron." So we have an interesting story then in the Midrash about the henpecked On, and On being told by his wife, "I don't think it's a good idea now to hang out with those characters. It's not going to be good for us. They're going to get all the attention, and we're just going to be subservient to them anyway, so forget it." And so it makes for an interesting story that the rabbis came up with about how to understand why On doesn't appear again in the story. So those are all interesting things to help us understand kind of the background here and what the rabbis want us to understand about the background. And there's another comment on page 861 about Korach referring to, a part of his argument is, in verse 3, "For all the community are holy, all of them, and the Lord is in their midst," suggesting we're all holy, Moses and Aaron. Why are you setting yourselves up as holier than everybody else? All of us in the community of Israel is holy. So the comment below the line suggests Yeshaya Leibovitz. So he is a prominent Israeli theologian and philosopher. sees Korach's demagoguery exposed in his claim that all the community are holy. That is, we have achieved our goal and nothing more need be demanded of us, right? So in other words, we're already holy. There's nothing more that we need to do in order to be holy. The Torah's position is that all the community is challenged to become holy, right? So in Leviticus, it's Kedoshim Tihiyu. You will be holy, for I, the Lord, your God, am holy. Okay, so in Leviticus, we're told throughout the book, or throughout the portion Kedoshim, chapter 19 and 20 in Leviticus, that we're constantly told there in that chapter, you should be holy. You should strive to be holy. And so it's a future goal, not a present boast, as Korach is saying here, that we are holy. Leibovitch interprets the words of the Torah several chapters later in chapter 26. The sons of Korach did not die to mean that such people exist in every generation, claiming that just being Jewish means that they are already as close to God as they have to be. True messengers present themselves as unworthy of the task, as Moses did at the burning bush. Only persons motivated by self-interest, eager for the position of leader, proclaim, I can do it better. So it's both from a leadership perspective that there's always more you can do, and you can always be better. So there's that sense of humility that makes a leader successful and to be worthy within the Jewish community. And there's always a sense that a true religious person is one who understands that there's always more to do to be Jewish, as opposed to, I'm at a good level right now, I'm happy where I'm at, there's nothing more I need to do. So there's that sense here. So that Korach then is a response. We need to have a response, the rabbis are saying and commentators are saying, to both the arrogance of Korach, that we're already at a high spiritual place, there's no more that we need to go, and that and also that leaders need to be humble. So the two very important messages that the commentary and the rabbis are trying to teach us. Further comments to look at. Yes. Yes. So, and what is the third aliyah on page 863? It begins on 863, verse 20 of chapter 16, verse 20. There's an interesting comment about the role. What were the other Israelites doing while Korach and his band of 250 active followers were arguing with Moses? What were the rest of the Israelite community doing, and what do we learn from that? So, beginning with verse 20, then the presence of the Lord appeared to the whole community, and the Lord spoke to Moses and Aaron, saying, stand back from this community, that I may annihilate them in an instant. But they fell on their faces and said, O God, source of the breath of all flesh, when one man sins, will you be wrathful with the whole community? So in other words, should the whole community suffer because of this, of Korach and his immediate band of followers? The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the community and say, withdraw from about the abodes of Korach, Datan, and Aviram. Right? Stand back. Don't be hanging out. So this leads to the comment below the line, withdraw from about the abodes. The Israelites were in a dangerous situation, characteristic of many people to this day. They did not agree with Korach, but neither did they actively oppose him. They stood aside to see how things would turn out. Right? So it's interesting to try to, this is Nechama Leibovitz, And Nechama Leibovitz is still quite the Torah teacher today. She has quite the following. She has published her lectures on all the portions of the Torah, and she has quite the insight into a psychological insight into the Torah portions. So her insight, what she's commenting on is what are all the other people doing, and just this idea of the people are kind of gathering around, right? So that whenever something's going on, it attracts a crowd. And people are interested. Doesn't mean necessarily that they are moving to the front and want to be part of the action. And it also doesn't mean that they're moving away, having nothing to do with it. There are a lot of people who just want to, I wonder what's going on here. So she's suggesting that people are saying, I wonder what's going on. What's going to happen between Korach and Moses here? This seems interesting. Might be something I want to watch. Not necessarily buying into Korach's position. I'm also not buying into Moses's position right now. Just want to see what's going on. So, what does it mean that there are these bystanders, and are they morally culpable in any way? So this is so the comment goes on. That is why Moses has to urge them to distance themselves from Korach and his followers, lest they be caught up in the latter's punishment, suffering the deserved fate of the bystander who does nothing to stop evil and perhaps even hopes to benefit from it. Right? So Moses saves these bystanders from being swallowed by the earth, which is about to happen. And it leaves a question for all of us today. Is there any moral responsibility for those who just stand by and let events take their course, right? So now the Torah teaches us al ta'amod al dam reyecha, which literally means don't stand on the blood of your neighbor, but it's translated as don't stand idly by. So we're told that being a passive bystander it tends to the bad as opposed to tending to the good in terms of morality and ethics. So the passive bystander who is not actively involved in saving somebody, or is also not actively involved in being on the side of the evil, still has a slightly negative connotation to him or her. So that passive bystander, Moses takes the time, as the Torah is pointing out here and the commentary is elucidating, taking the time to save those bystanders, even though they are tending towards the morally and ethically questionable kind of character. And so that's an interesting lesson that the commentary is teaching us here, that we might think that it's okay to be so let's think about what's going on in the world today. So what are we doing about actively protesting with the Black Lives Matter organization and anybody who is standing up for social justice, right? So are we just hanging back a little bit to see what is happening? And is there anything wrong in hanging back? The Torah is suggesting here that possibly that's not what we're supposed to do, that we should rise above hanging back, and we should try to be actively involved in advocating for social justice and police reform and racial justice. All of these are Jewish concepts that we should be actively engaged in. Now, the restrictions with the COVID-19 virus prevent us from actively engaging in the protest movements itself, right? That's why I haven't seen fit to go down to DC and march in these protests. I just don't think it's safe to do so. It's not because I don't agree with the protests. It's because I don't think it's safe to do so. But I try to be actively involved in other ways, like the partnership with the Sharp Street Church and providing opportunities for us to be engaged in that way. But of course, I could do more. I could engage in these organizations that stand up for social justice and be more of a presence in advocacy. And that is what the Torah is trying to teach here. Why was it left to Moses and God to stem the rebellion of Korach and his followers? Why didn't the rest of the community stand up and put them down? It was only 250 people. Like I said, it's less than 0.2% of it's 0.2% of the entire Israelite population. Easily could have been quelled. Why didn't the community do it? And so those are the bigger religious questions that the Torah and the commentary are teaching us here. Okay, we have just a couple of minutes left, and so yeah, there's something about Moses's character that's in a comment on page 867. Right. So it's 867. It's chapter 17, beginning with verse 8, around the beginning of the fourth Aliyah. So let's read a few of these verses. When Moses and Aaron reached the tent of meeting, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Remove yourselves from this community, that I may annihilate them in an instant." They fell on their faces. Then Moses said to Aaron, "Take the fire pan and put on it fire from the altar. Add incense and take it quickly to the community and make expiation for them. For wrath has gone forth from the Lord, the plague has begun." Aaron took it as Moses had ordered and ran to the midst of the congregation where the plague had begun among the people. He put on the incense and made expiation for the people. He stood between the dead and the living until the plague was checked. Those who died of the plague came to 14,700, aside from those who died on account of Korach. Aaron then returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting, since the plague was checked. So some of these extra people, besides the 250 followers who were swallowed up, were killed in a plague until Aaron intervened with this special incense that saved the people. So there's a comment here about Moses below the line. Once again, we see the greatness of soul that characterizes Moses and Aaron. They are the targets of the people's anger, but when God is about to punish the people and vindicate them, it is Moses and Aaron who intercede on their behalf. The two-pronged rebellion has been put down. The supremacy and legitimacy of Moses and Aaron as God's elect have been affirmed, but not without cost. Successive collisions have taken their cumulative toll on the people and on their leaders, as later events will show, right? So that Moses is going to be punished for his temper finally giving in to his exasperation with the people. We'll see that in a couple of chapters when he hits the people complain of thirst, and God tells Moses, "Talk to this rock and water will come out of it." And Moses, still hearing the complaints of the people, hits the rock instead of speaking to it. So he violates God's command, and because of that, he is punished by not being allowed to enter the land of Israel. So exasperation with the people leads to Moses's temper, and he's able to withhold his temper for a long time always praying on the people's behalf, but we'll see in a portion or two how the temper will get the better of him. So that's what this commentary is saying here. Even in the midst of this rebellion against Moses's leadership itself, where he would have the right to be angry at the people, he's not angry at them, and he wants to save them still. So just then pointing out again the greatness of Moses's character. So let's stop here for today. I want to point out that I'm going to be away next week, Sunday to Friday, on vacation. So I won't be, we won't be together next Wednesday at this time, but we will meet again in 2 weeks from today, and for the rest of the summer as well, this Wednesday time. It's just next Wednesday we'll be off, but we'll be back again in 2 weeks. So have a good rest of the day, everybody. Remember that there's Minyan this evening at 7:30 for an opportunity for us to be together again. Stay safe and be well, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Goodbye, everybody. Good week. Bye.
Have a good day.